Steve Martin is a name synonymous with comedy brilliance. For over 50 years, his sharp wit, impeccable timing, and unique blend of intellectual humor and physical comedy have made him a beloved figure in Hollywood and beyond. From his iconic role in The Jerk to the charming father in Father of the Bride, Martin's work has shaped American comedy in profound ways. But behind that genial smile and twinkling eyes lies a side of Steve Martin few have ever seen. A side marked by exacting standards, fierce professionalism, and a surprisingly long list of actors he simply couldn't tolerate. While Steve Martin has always been known as a consummate professional, recent insider accounts reveal a more complicated reality. Behind the scenes, Martin kept a mental blacklist of performers whose styles or attitudes clashed so deeply with his own that he refused to work with them again. These weren't petty grudges or celebrity feuds. They were rooted in fundamental differences about what comedy should be. What drives a comedic genius like Steve Martin to harbor such strong feelings against some of Hollywood's biggest names? And why have these tensions remained hidden from the public eye for so long? Today, we're peeling back the curtain on the 7 actors who pushed Steve Martin to his limits, and in some cases, beyond. Chevy Chase, When Comedy Philosophies Collide. On the surface, Three Amigos, 1986, was a comedic triumph, bringing together Steve Martin, Chevy Chase, and Martin Short as a trio of bumbling heroes. Fans still quote lines like "My Little Buttercup" with affection. But behind the scenes, the relationship between Martin and Chase was anything but friendly. The peak of their careers, these two comedy titans represented polar opposites. Martin, a former philosophy student, approached comedy like a master craftsman. Every line, every gesture, every pause meticulously planned and rehearsed. For him, comedy was a precise art form akin to clockwork. Chase, by contrast, was a wild card. Rising to fame on Saturday Night Live, he thrived on improvisation and unpredictability, often veering off script to chase a laugh. This freewheeling style clashed violently with Martin's disciplined approach. Director John Landis, who worked with both men, described it perfectly. It was like watching fire meet ice. Martin would have a scene timed down to the millisecond, only for Chase to improvise wildly, throwing off the entire rhythm. Tension reached a boiling point during a complex scene involving choreography and dialogue. After Chase improvised for the 7th take in a row, Martin reportedly pulled the director aside and said, "Either he follows the script or I walk." Though the director managed to keep the peace, the friction lingered throughout filming. Years later, Martin's thinly veiled jab at Chase during a comedy awards show, "If ego were money, Chevy could buy Wall Street," revealed the depth of his frustration. Two giants of comedy, forced to share a stage but unable to reconcile their fundamentally different approaches. Jim Carrey, Chaos Meets Control. Steve Martin and Jim Carrey never starred in a major project together, but their paths crossed often enough to reveal a stark contrast in comedic philosophy. Martin's comedy is built on structure, precision, and intellectual rigor. Carrey's style is wild, physical, and fueled by manic energy. The 1995 American Comedy Awards, this clash was on full display. Carrey, riding high on hits like Ace Ventura and Dumb and Dumber, launched into an unplanned, rambling routine that stretched on far longer than expected. Cameras caught Martin's theatrical yawn and glance at his watch, a silent but unmistakable rebuke. Later that night, Martin took the stage carrying an oversized wrap-it-up sign, a pointed dig at Carrey's overlong performance. A producer who worked with both explained their divide. Steve sees comedy as mathematics, precise, elegant, with a clear solution. Jim sees it as jazz, wild, improvisational, sometimes messy but often brilliant. When Carrey was suggested as a co-star for a 1998 studio comedy, Martin reportedly told the director, "I'd rather act opposite a tornado. At least with a natural disaster, you know which way it's going to spin." Their tension never exploded publicly, but it was clear these two comedic geniuses spoke entirely different languages. What do you think? Is comedy better when it's carefully crafted or when it's spontaneous and wild? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'm curious to know what you think. Bill Murray, the SNL incident that froze a friendship. Before Bill Murray became the enigmatic legend we know today, He was a rising star on Saturday Night Live, known for brilliant improv but also a reputation for being difficult. Steve Martin, meanwhile, was already a beloved recurring host on the show, famous for characters like the wild and crazy guy. Their collision course came during a 1978 episode when they were scheduled to perform a sketch together. Bill arrived late to rehearsal, already putting Martin on edge. Punctuality was sacred to Steve. Worse, Murray seemed uninterested in running through the planned routine, opting instead to wing it. When the sketch went live, Murray's improvisations threw off Martin's carefully timed responses. At one point, Murray even mocked Martin's delivery, mimicking his voice and mannerisms. To viewers, it might have seemed like comedy gold, but backstage, Martin was visibly distressed, as if his script had been set on fire. After the show, Martin confronted Murray, saying, "Comedy is a partnership, not a hijacking." Murray laughed it off, telling Martin to lighten up. The fallout was a decade-long Cold War. Though they eventually shared a stage again, the warmth was gone. SNL producer Lorne Michaels later explained, "Steve values structure and respect for the material. Bill's genius is spontaneity and disruption. Sometimes two brilliant minds just don't mesh." Steve Carell, the unlikely rift on the big year. First glance, Steve Martin and Steve Carell seem like a perfect match, both known for playing awkward intellectual characters with a strong work ethic. But during the filming of 2011's The Big Year, tensions quietly simmered. Carell, honed by years of improvisation on The Office, often suggested alternate lines and approaches during table reads. Martin, who arrived memorized and mapped out, found this disruptive. One frustrated moment saw Martin pull the director aside, asking, "Is this a script reading or a writing session?" "Because I prepared for the former." Though no open conflict erupted, Martin and Carell rarely socialized off-set. When the film's promotional tour began, Martin was paired mostly with Jack Black, not Carell. Since then, the two have never worked together again. A director who worked with both explained, "Martin sees improvisation as a sign the script isn't good enough. Carell sees it as a way to discover something better." This subtle but fundamental difference kept them apart. Adam Sandler, the generational comedy divide. Steve Martin and Adam Sandler represent two very different eras and philosophies of comedy. Martin, the intellectual absurdist of the 70s and 80s, elevated comedy to an art form with wit, irony, and carefully crafted absurdity. Sandler, rising in the 90s, built his empire on man-child characters, juvenile humor, and slapstick. Though they never worked together, Martin's disdain for Sandler's style was clear. In a 2003 interview, Martin said, "I love wit. Slapstick is fine, but some things are just noise in a wig." Industry insiders understood this as a veiled critique of Sandler's brand of humor. When Sandler was considered for a major comedy project in the early 2000s, Martin reportedly said, "I think we're making different kinds of movies," ending the discussion. For Martin, comedy was a sophisticated art form. For Sandler, it was about immediate laughs and broad appeal. Joe Piscopo, the SNL tension that almost ended a tradition. During Saturday Night Live's low point in the early 1980s, Joe Piscopo was a cast member whose broad impressions and muscle-bound persona clashed with Martin's comedic ideals. Martin, who had hosted SNL many times during its golden era, was deeply concerned about the show's direction. During rehearsals for an episode Martin was hosting, Piscopo's Frank Sinatra impression left Martin visibly pained. He reportedly asked the head writer, "Is this what the show is now?" Martin even requested several of Piscopo's sketches be reworked or cut. When Lorne Michaels returned to rebuild SNL's reputation, Martin refused to host again while Piscopo was still on the cast. This episode reveals Martin's uncompromising commitment to comedy as a craft. Bad comedy wasn't just unfunny to him, it was an offense. Eddie Murphy, the superstar standoff. In the early 1980s, Eddie Murphy emerged as a comedy phenomenon, bringing a raw, streetwise energy that contrasted sharply with Martin's cerebral absurdism. Though Martin publicly praised Murphy's stand-up, behind the scenes their relationship was complicated. Martin reportedly declined multiple opportunities to work with Murphy, feeling his comedy relied too much on crude humor and profanity. Murphy, in turn, dismissed Martin's style as out of touch with younger audiences. When both were considered for a Paramount project in the early 90s, negotiations collapsed because neither would commit to working with the other. A studio executive summed it up: Steve thought Eddie was too Hollywood, too vulgar. Eddie thought Steve was out of touch. This standoff marked a changing of the guard in comedy, two legends embodying different eras and philosophies, unable to bridge the divide. Steve Martin's story is a reminder that comedy is not just about laughs. It's a deeply personal art form shaped by philosophy, discipline, and vision. His list of actors he couldn't stand isn't about ego or drama. It's about a profound commitment to what comedy can and should be. What do you think? Can comedy truly thrive when such different styles collide? Or is this tension the very spark that creates greatness? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'm curious to know what you think.